Apple Inc. is an American multinational technology company headquartered in Cupertino, California, that designs, develops, and sells consumer electronics, computer software, and online services. Its hardware products include the iPhone smartphone, the iPad tablet computer, the Mac personal computer, the iPod portable media player, and the Apple smartwatch. Apple's consumer software includes the OS X and the iOS operating systems, the iTunes media player, the Safari web browser, and the iLife and iWork creativity and productivity suites. Its online services include the iTunes Store, the iOS App Store, and the Mac App Store and iCloud. Apple Computers Inc. was founded on April 1, 1976 by two college dropouts named Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, together with Ronald Wayne, who left the company after 12 days because he thought that he was standing in the shadows of two brilliant giants, and so he sold his shares for a total of $800. Since Jobs and Wozniak were both interested in the field of electronics, they both envisioned a product that would allow people to view computers in a different way. They basically wanted to create computers that were small enough for people to put into their homes and offices. And so Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak started building to what was known to be Apple I in Jobs' garage and decided to sell it off without keyboards, monitors, or casings. Hobbyists did not take their Apple product seriously until the year 1977 when Jobs and Wozniak introduced the Apple II at a local trade show. Apple II revolutionized the computer industry by being the first personal computer to come in a plastic case and to have colored graphics. Orders for the Apple machine continued to rise drastically, which allowed sales to jump from $7.8 million in 1978 to $117 million in 1980. The introduction of the Apple Disk II, which was the most inexpensive and easy-to-use floppy drive, allowed the sales of Apple to also further increase. With a continuing increase in sales, came an increase in the company size. By the time the Apple III was released in the year 1980, Apple had a growing number of employees and had also begun selling computers abroad. Apple had also taken more mid-level managers and potential investors who wanted to be part of the board of directors. In 1981, things became more difficult for Apple in terms of selling their computers because of a growing saturated market. This in result caused Apple to lay off some of their workers. In February, Wozniak took a leave of absence after being injured in a plane crash, and Steve Jobs became chairman by March. In 1985, a power struggle developed between Jobs and CEO John Squilly, who had been hired 2 years earlier. After that argument, the board deemed Jobs' presence in the company too disruptive, so Jobs decided to leave the company. In the same year that he resigned, he founded Next Inc. Over the next few months after Steve Jobs left the company, Apple was forced to lay off a fifth of its workforce. The company also declared their first quarterly loss, which brought about the company to question the ability of Squilly as CEO. During this time also, Squilly had a lock-in battle with Bill Gates over the introduction of their Windows 1.0 because of its similarities with the Mac GUI. Bill Gates eventually agreed to sign the agreement stating that Microsoft wouldn't use Apple's interface. Sometime later, Squilly began to lose interest in the day-to-day operations of Apple. By 1994, announced the Power Mac family, which was the first Macs to be based on the Power PC chip. It was basically an extremely fast processor that was co-developed with IBM and Motorola. This paved the way for the Macs to compete with the other processors and computers. During Splinter's terms as CEO, he was able to license the Mac OS to several companies including the Power Computing, which was one of Apple's successful Mac clone makers. But it was believed that Apple was still being too restrictive in terms of their licensing, which only allowed few companies to acquire their licensing agreements. By 1995, Apple was yet again facing several problems, especially in terms of building their computers. They had $1 billion in back orders, which they were not able to make due to the lack of parts to create them. They were also experiencing heavy competition with Microsoft after they released the Windows 95, which mimicked the Mac GUI 10 times better. However, they took the worst plunge ever in the winter of 1995 to 1996. Misjudging the market, Apple pushed for low-cost performance over mid-range Power Macs, which failed them to earn a profit. In fact, during that quarter, they declared a $68 million loss, and so by January 1996, Spinder was asked to resign as CEO, who was later on replaced by Gil Amelio, the former president of National Semiconductor. Amelio made a strong effort to bring Apple back to profitability by creating broad changes in the corporate structure of the company. The company was to be split into 7 separate divisions, with each being responsible for their profit or loss. He also wanted to always keep his developers and customers up to date with the company's day-to-day affairs. Through this effort, he was able to bring down the loss of the company from $740 million from quarter 1 to $33 million in quarter 2. In quarter 3, Apple was finally able to profit nearly $30 million, which astounded many financial experts. By late December 1996, Apple announced that they will be acquiring Next and that Steve Jobs will be returning to the company. The merger was brought about in order to acquire Next Step, which was to be used as Apple Next Generation OS, the Rhapsody. In early July 1997, Apple announced Gil Amelio's resignation after a multi-million-dollar quarterly loss. The executive board stated that they felt that Amelio had already done all he could for Apple, and that while he was responsible for several improvements of Apple, they believed that he could no longer contribute anything anymore. And so Fred Anderson, Apple's CFO, was put into charge for the day-to-day operation of the company while they were still searching for a new CEO. Steve Jobs, on the other hand, was given an expanded role at the Apple for the interim. Steve Jobs' presence instantly became known, and so, with no CEO and Apple stock being lower than ever, Steve Jobs acted as the interim CEO. Jobs began making striking changes to the structure of Apple, such as the canceling of Newton's spin-off, creating aggressive advertising campaigns, creating new Macs and the Rhapsody. He also announced an entirely new board of directors. But the most breaking news of all was his announcement of the alliance with Microsoft, wherein their Office 98 would be made available for the Mac by the end of the year. Jobs also cut the ties with power computing because he saw that they were not able to effectively expand the Mac OS market, and instead they were stealing their customers away. By early fall 1997, Apple announced that they would be purchasing the Power Computing's Mac OS license and much of its engineering staff. They also bought its Mac OS licenses from Motorola and IBM. On November 10, 1997, Jobs announced that Apple would be now selling Computer Direct both over the web and the phone, which Power Computing have been doing for the past years. On the first month of 1999, they released a new sleek Power Mac G3, and Steve Jobs announced that for 5 consecutive years, they were profitable every quarter. Then the month of July came, they introduced the iBook that brought style to the low-end market, and it became a top sell just like when they released the iMac. After a few months, Jobs announced their newest professional desktop machine called the Power Mac G4. As a result, Apple's stock had risen, and at mid-September, its trading reached an all-time high stock price. In the year 2000, Jobs announced that he will become the permanent CEO of Apple. At that time, the sales of Apple continued to rise to the point that their stock price hit the 130 mark by March. By July 2000, they released a Power Mac G4 Cube. Without any assurance that the product would become a hit in the market, Jobs gambled this and released it in the market. During this time, Apple experienced a crisis after the entire technology industry experienced slow sales due to a misunderstanding in the consumer market. One of the reasons for the decline of Apple was because the G4 Cube was being sold at a very high price as compared to Apple's previous products. Another reason for their loss in sales was because Apple decided to include the DVD-ROM instead of the CD-RW, which was what most of the consumers wanted. In order to solve this crisis, Apple decided to lower the prices of the entire Power Mac line. On January 2001, Power Mac announced that they would create either CD-RW drives or a new super drive which could read both CDs and DVDs into their computers. They also announced their newest music player called iTunes. On May 2001, Apple also planned to open retail stores across America wherein they would be selling their products together with MP3 players, digital stills, and video cameras. With this, they could revitalize Apple sales and protect the long-term security of the company. The fall of 2001 brought about new revisions to the PowerBook G4 and iBook lines, with the latter having sold extremely well during the summer. In the late October, Apple announced its first non-computer product in several years, the iPod. Priced at an amount of $399, the iPod faced a similar challenge to that of the G4 Cube. It favored style and form factor over price, causing Apple to gamble the product by charging it at a premium for its superior design and small size. In January 2002, Apple released its flat panel iMac and announced a new software package called the iPhoto, which improved the digital camera user experience. For the first two quarters, Apple made profits but suffered largely on the second half of the quarter because of the macroeconomic conditions. In June, Apple announced its Switchers ad campaign that was considered to be the most popular and successful ad of Apple's history. With the market condition in 2002, Apple continued to suffer financial troubles and announced a quarterly loss of $45 million from the weak sales of the PowerBook and the Power Mac. In 2003, Apple began to recover and announced new PowerBook G4 models and announced the shipping of its own web browser Safari. On April 2003, the company launched the iTunes Music Store, where individual songs would be sold at 99 cents each. It was first exclusively available just for the Macintosh, but was later made available to Windows on the month of October. The application had a 70% market share among the legal online music download services. Apple found itself in the position of having a monopoly for the first time in several decades. Due to licensing restrictions, the music store was initially only available in the United States, but was later expanded to United Kingdom, France, Germany, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Switzerland. On September 12, 2006, the iTunes Music Store was changed into iTunes Store, where it began offering TV shows and movies for sale. On January 9, 2007, Apple Computers Inc. decided to shorten their name to simply Apple Inc. In his Macworld Expo keynote address, Steve Jobs explained that Apple wasn't just a computer company anymore, since they began offering a current product mix consisting of the iPad and the Apple TV. He also revealed a product that would revolutionize the entire industry, which he introduced as the iPhone. On June 29, 2007, the first version of the iPhone was made available in selected countries. After 12 months, iPhone 3G was introduced when on June 8, 2009, Apple announced the iPhone 3GS. The 12-month iteration cycle basically continued with the iPhone 4 model arriving in 2010. A big advanced technology was introduced in the two iPod types that were a multi-touch, the iPod Nano and the iPod Touch. Apple TV also had a second generation that was 4 times smaller than the original one, and Apple started selling wireless trackpads, keyboards, mouse, and external drives. On January 2010, the Apple iPad was announced, which was fitted into Apple's iOS product line. On March 2011, iPad 2 was introduced with a front-facing camera as well as rear-facing camera, along with 3 new apps, Camera, FaceTime, and Photo Booth. On August 24, 2011, Steve Jobs resigned from his position as CEO and Tim Cook replaced him. And on October 2011, Steve Jobs passed away. Structural changes were announced on October 29, 2012 to increase collaboration between Apple's hardware, software, and services, which caused Scott Forstall, the person who launched the iOS, to replace Craig Federighi as the head of iOS and the OS X teams. Meanwhile, Jony Ive became the head of Human Interface and Eddie Kwe became the head of Online Services, which includes Siri and Maps. The short-term restructuring resulted to a very successful launch of the iOS 7, the first version of the operating system, to use a drastically different sign. A year later was the release of the OS X Yosemite, which was also headed by Jony Ive. During the same year, Apple released the iPhone 5, which was the first phone to have a screen larger than 3.5 inch. Together with this was the iPod Touch 5, MacBook Pro with Retina display, the iPad Mini, and the iPad 4th generation. In the year 2013, the iPhone 5S and the iPhone 5C was released, which featured a fingerprint scanning technology in the form of Touch ID. Together with the release was the 3rd generation MacBook Pro, the MacBook Air, the iPad Air, and the iPad Mini. On November 25, 2013, Apple acquired a company called the PrimeSense. On May 28, 2014, they were also able to acquire Beat Electronics, a popular producers of Beat by Dre headphones and speakers, as well as the streaming service Beats Music. On 2014, the iPad Air came also that featured a Touch ID. The MacBook range also got discontinued in the same year for a short period of time before reintroducing it again in 2015 with various features such as the absence of ports other than the USB-C. They also updated the Mac Pro and the iMac lines with a drastically thinner or smaller but more powerful designs. On April 24, 2015, Apple released the Apple Watch, which was the first new product range since the departure of Steve Jobs. The product was designed to have basic features such as remotes and fitness tracking and was only able to function if it was in the range of the Bluetooth or Wi-Fi range. Although the Apple Watch showcased many promises, it acquired many negative critics such as the lacking a clear purpose of what it was for. On September 9, 2015, Apple announced the iPhone 6s and the iPhone 6s Plus, which featured a 3D touch together with a 4.7-inch and 5.5-inch screen display. They also introduced the iPad Pro, the 4th generation Apple TV, and the 4th generation iPad mini. After Apple announced that the sales of their flagship smartphone started to increase at its slowest sales yet since its debut in 2007, many business analysts have been expecting the company to release iPhone 7 to get back up on their feet. It's been said that the company investors have been worried about the iPhone sales slowdown because of Apple's failure to create enough buzz customers with the latest release of their iPhone 6s model. The company forecasts that their overall revenue will see its sharpest drop in 15 years this quarter because of the shortage of new must-have in gadgets. In order to meet the highest hopes of Apple customers, Apple has been working hard to make the iPhone 7 a product that will be able to meet many expectations. For instance, Apple might be trying to go for a greener approach by trying to building a solar cell underneath the iPhone's touchscreen to allow it to recharge during the day without needing to plug it into the socket. There may also be a possibility for the iPhone to be waterproof and for it to have a curved display. It has been said that it might be released this coming fall with a price of $130. In addition to the possible release of the iPhone 7, many having been saying that the upcoming iPad Air 3 might also be coming in the way with the possibility of it having advanced hand sensing callable gesture. Apple also unveiled in the WWDC in June the iOS 9, which could possibly feature scheduled text messages, maps avoiding poor cellular signals, and many more. Nothing much has been confirmed yet as to when and what will the future Apple products will feature in the future. But Apple is working hard to try and satisfy the expectations of their customers.